Nick, welcome. We are honored to have you sharing your wisdom with us. And one of the most critical aspects of having strong bones for life is movement, daily movement.
Absolutely. And of course, everybody should do yoga
Well,
on
okay,
the
thank you
basis.
for saying that because there's a lot of physicians out there that are really scared about yoga. I would say you have to have a trained person. If you have osteoporosis or osteopenia, definitely go to someone that is skilled in osteoporosis or bone health because that's important.
That's absolutely true. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to learn yoga and going to follow yoga practice, then you need to have a good trainer who has an understanding of what the body will do in certain situations. That said, we go back to 2018 when the Royal Osteoporosis Society in the UK published its strong, steady, straight guidance on what exercises you can do if you've got a new diagnosis of osteopenia or osteoporosis. And what they said actually was, you know what, don't stop moving. That's the first thing, completely what you just said. If you're used to doing yoga or Pilates and suddenly you've had a DEXA scan that says you've got osteoporosis, you're not suddenly a different person. You can carry on doing it as long as you take certain precautions and you do it correctly. So it's all about form, isn't it? It's about doing things correctly. And I think that part of that is having a really good teacher who understands what the limitations might be and how a woman particularly might then need to maybe slightly modify things, but it's not about stopping stuff. It's about keeping going, but doing it safely.
Yeah, and I think we're a little bit more litigious here in the States. So they're much more cautious in what they say. And our guidelines said no forward folding, which forward flexion in the spine is definitely a no-no. You have to do it in your hips. But the other interesting one is the twisting. And I think it was the Mayo Clinic that came out with an article with a very small study that said don't twist. And then everyone thinks we shouldn't twist. Yet twisting gives the opportunity to pull on the vertebra from so many different angles with all the muscles that are intertwined up the spine. So we are a little bit more hardcore here, I think, when we give our recommendations.
But look back at what Belinda Becker said in the Lift More study. So Belinda did this fantastic study that then showed that Lift More, which is a high intensity impact and resistance training program, in women who had low bone density and very low bone density, i.e., osteopenia and osteoporosis, they had no spinal fractures in that program. So if you do it right, you do it carefully, and you do it in a structured way, then you can do these things. And let's face it, I mean, if you've got someone who has had, say, a broken wrist, and they've been had a DEXA scan, and the DEXA said, okay, you got osteoporosis, and before they had the DEXA scan, they were doing things completely normally, but they'd just fallen over and broken their wrist. Why shouldn't they carry on doing things completely normal afterwards if they're doing it sensibly? Because if somebody leans down to take a t-shirt out of the bottom drawer of a chest of drawers, they're bending forward and lifting a very small weight. Now, what you don't want to do is what a patient of mine did about a year and a half ago, and that is that she thought that it was a really good idea to spend all day in the garden and then at the end of the garden to lift a planter that weighed around about 40, 45 pounds. And not surprisingly, by then she was fatigued, her muscles didn't support her, and she burst her L3. So, it's all about being sensible, isn't it? It's all about doing things sensibly, not saying don't do anything. It's do it if you're doing it sensibly.
Yeah, and proper alignment is critical because then you can apply the proper osteogenic load that's going to give you a safe bone building stimulation.
But also activation of muscles, because if your extensor muscles are not activated, so the extensors of those big gyrate muscles at the back of your spine, if they're not activated when you're bending forward to lift, you've got nothing to prevent that force going through the front of the spine. And of course, all that force is going to potentially cause a problem. If the extensor muscles are hauling you back up, it's counteracting that. It's hauling you in, just like the hauling in the fish when you go fishing.
Like a drawbridge. I always think of it as a
Yeah.
drawbridge. So then those extensor muscles, well, those, I guess, those are more like the psoas, right? When you're doing hip flexion, the chains for the drawbridge, would that be the psoas muscle? And then the door
No.
itself would be, or the bridge.
When you're doing hip flexion, what's keeping you upright are your extensor muscles. They run from the back of your head down to the back of your knees. There's a
Mm.
whole massive chain going all the way down the back of the spine. So you need that spine to be held in this flex position, but all the muscles on the back are acting like guy ropes on a flagpole, and they're holding you up and stopping you from falling forward and stopping that force going forward. So the psoas muscle is driving the hip flexion in the front of the spine. So it's bringing the spine forward and lifting the hip up. But the extensor muscles are the one that control that movement. When they fail and the spine goes forward, then you get uncontrolled force on the bones. And if they are already weak, that's when they can fail. That's when they can fracture.
Yeah, and yoga does a lot of great back strengthening work.
Correct. Correct. So anyway, so there we are. What an introduction.
Okay, so that, yes, great. Thank you. But also, Nick, because you're a spinal surgeon, I think it just makes it more credible that you give this okay for yoga. And my goal is to raise awareness amongst physicians that yoga is actually great for bone health and not to be scared of it. So I think that that's important that you share that information.
I never regretted saying to somebody, carry on doing yoga. And I've never seen anybody who has ever sustained a fracture doing yoga or Pilates. And when in 2018, the Royal Osteoporosis Society did their literature search and they released their recommendations regarding exercise, they also could never find, they didn't find a single incident in the literature of somebody having a fracture when doing controlled yoga, Pilates type exercises. It just wasn't there. So, so I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of what the exercises do and what actually yoga might be. And I think it's an education piece on all the various types of exercise that are available. There are a lot of doctors and a lot of PAs and people in general need to understand so they can actually come to this and say, okay, fine, I need to do an exercise program for my bone health and my general health, my cardiovascular health. What can I do? What can I do safely that's not going to put me in jeopardy? And that education piece, I think, is going to be probably, realistically, we've got an aging society. We've got to educate people increasingly as time goes by. And in the next 10, 15 years, it's going to be up to people like you, Debbie, as an educator, to be able to get it out there to say, look, this is what yoga can offer. This is what is safe to do. This is what we're not going to do because we think there might be a risk, etc., etc. So, join us and join the revolution.
Yep, you're right. All right. Thanks, Nick.
You're welcome.
It's a great plug for yoga. Well, I say yoga therapy. So yoga therapy is a 1,000-hour training. We're trained by physicians, physical therapists, chiropractic. We learn about conditions. It's a clinical training. And when you have that much awareness, then you can actually take into account the whole person and all of the factors and the contraindications so you can make it a very safe practice.
Yep, yep. And all those are needed. Yeah, I mean, I know we're getting slightly off topic here because we're talking about DEXA, but it's absolutely fascinating. But the big problem is I see, if you like, a symmetry with Pilates. So I've been really supportive of Pilates as a form of exercise for 20 something years. And what I've seen is that there are sort of different types of Pilates, and I'm sure the same is with yoga. And that is you've got people who are one-to-one or one to a small group who take control of the exercise and the safety aspect of it. And I'm sure the same is in yoga. And then you've got the big groups. So you go to a gym and there are 40 people doing a class, and there's one person at the front who's standing there said, follow me. And if you can't, well, tough. Yeah, there's a world of difference there, isn't there?
There is, but it's interesting. So I've been teaching since 2014. I teach through a hospital. We're hybrid since 2023. I sometimes have 14 women on a Zoom, and in my class, physically with me, I have 17. So I have 31 women. But because I teach so posturally aligned in each posture and I speak through the whole entire movement, because it's not about finding, it's not a pose, it's a posture, and it's constantly moving safely into it. And when you're there to create as much tension, as much stress on the bone, pushing and pulling and staying in that alignment, and then exiting, I say exit gracefully. Don't just fall out of this. Don't be like, okay, great, that's over, and then you just pop out. So I have learned, because I've had so much experience at this point, to be able to teach in the large groups. But you're right, that's not the typical. And if it's one person at the front, that, and especially depending on their level of training and expertise. So typically the smaller or the one-on-one are definitely going to get you more safe, directed, and guidance.
Yeah.